have another terrific interview for you guys today. Peter Joseph, only the founder of the Zeitgeist Movement, not a big deal. His first movie was in 2007, Zeitgeist the movie, which makes sense. Zeitgeist Addendum came out in 2008. Zeitgeist Moving Forward came out in 2011. Peter, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I really appreciate you having me.
All right, now a lot of people might not be familiar with the Zeitgeist Movement,
Sure.
So let's start there. What is it?
Zeitgeist Movement is a global sustainability advocacy group that essentially orients itself around economic theory and how we can change the social system to be more pliable, humane, and sustainable across the world.
Okay, so what's wrong with the system we have now? Doesn't it kick ass? Aren't we number one?
Of course we're number one. Number one in a lot of things, a lot of negative things, unfortunately. A lot of life support systems are in decline. We have growing destabilization across the world. We've watched Occupy come and go. Well, it's still lingering, but in different forms now. And the problems we're seeing in the world, both on the human level and the ecological level, is this discord. We're taking a square peg and trying to fit it into a round hole. And from here on out, it's only going to get worse across the board.
I counter by saying USA.
We have an electric car industry that's slowly inching its way into America. What happened to it, say, 100 years ago when the first electric car actually emerged? Why hasn't this technology been completely proliferated around the world? Why? Because industry also is greedy, stubborn, it gets established and doesn't want to change its mechanisms of profit. Across the board, and this is one of the greatest things we talk about in the movement, we are paralyzed by this value ethic. And now I'm not saying that the market system wasn't great a long time ago. In the handicraft industry, we had a simple type of post-feudalism, mercantilism kind of world where everyone was a producer, and everyone was trading. That's beautiful in and of itself. But technology and everything that's happened around us has completely stifled this to the extent that it's no longer applicable in its merit, and we are evolving out of it. And there's no better word to use than evolution. I don't put down capitalism and the market economy because it was always bad. I say it's no longer relevant, especially in a world where we can create an abundance. So when you see this corruption that people call, it's not corruption, it's the freedom of the market. I have the freedom in the market to shut you down if you have a competing product or if you have something that's going to interfere with my market share. That is the free market, not this illusion that everyone's going to compete freely and not have any inhibitions in this sort of utopian laissez-faire thing that goes on. Do you want to resolve global problems? Do you want to resolve poverty? We can overnight. Do you want to resolve corruption? Do you want to resolve the fact that we have ecological destabilization coming out every single angle with almost every life support in decline? We can, but it's going to take overriding the current social system and moving on.
But I need to know how.
Okay.
So I agree with you that, if you breed a certain culture, you will get that culture. So if you reward and incentivize greed, you will get more greed.
Yep.
Same with corruption, etc. So I don't believe that the way we do things is the only way we can do things. And I believe that there is a better way and we can get there. Now, I need to know more about the specifics though. So for example, if you say, okay, we have enough food to feed the world. That's true, we do. The question is, how do you allocate it? So that's what I throw at you.
Well, let's think about allocation. What is the point of any allocation in a market system? It's to get needs to people, really. It's something that doesn't really happen. As every major World Health Organization has stated that it's not the food, it's not the nutrients, it's not the calories that's in a deficit, it's the fact that there's not enough money in these environments for these poor people to have resolution. There's not enough money to create the desalination plants to bring clean water. So the problem is economic. So in allocation, what does it mean? It means meeting the needs of the human population. Why should we give birth to anyone on this planet that we cannot take care of? And the fact of the matter is we can. So that's a huge subject. I could go on a massive spiel about how an entirely new social system could be generated that takes in all the needs of the entire human population at once. And probably the first thing that comes out of anyone listening to this will be communism, because that's a general reaction, but that is not what it is at all. It's actually making a society that isn't an anti-society, which is what we have now.
So how do you change it?
Okay. How do you change a system that is inherently corrupt? How do you change a system, move from something where everyone has been so deeply conditioned into these values and ethics to the fact that it's glamorized now, into something that is actually sustainable in meeting the needs of the human population in an abundance? Transition, again, is the most complicated thing you can talk about. But you have to change, which is what the Zeitgeist Movement does, the value systems first. You have to get people to realize the underlying problem and get them to actually understand the solution. So when you talk about change, literally, it's a change of the human being. It's a change of you and I, to realize that we might be a part of this system, we might have to engage it. I have to sell movies, I have to engage in the evil capitalist stuff, and everyone says I'm a hypocrite for that. But that's me living in the system I was born into, trying to work through it. We have to deviate and create plans to enable an abundance, to enable these elements that would comprise the characteristics of the new social system in the future, which would, again, reward these attributes. One of the great psychological revolutions, great sociological revolutions that has to occur if we intend to survive on this planet is we have to stop delegating decision-making to people and delegating decision-making to a process of rational thought and logic. This is completely devoid in the world. Let me express this because I know it's a difficult thing to just throw out there. We can calculate society now. Science has only been with us really in application for about 600 years. We can calculate what the greatest conductor of conducting metal is and why it should be used in certain forms and not in others. We can apply this type of reasoning to everything. And I don't mean some utopianistic thing where suddenly there's a matrix and everything's calculated. That's an ideal. That probably isn't reality, at least not now. But that's the way we should approach our thought process. We have to arrive at conclusions, not base them on traditional notions or pre-existing systems. We're not thinking wide enough. And I'm calling you out a little bit just because you got to be wider. You got to look at what's possible.
Pretty wide.
Yeah, I'm looking at what's possible and thinking about how a lot of the fears that we have about a loss of individuality, a loss of final are not actually applicable to the type of system of interaction I'm speaking of. And I'll say one more final.
I'm not sure I'm buying that.
Okay.
Because
what's the objection?
I mean, look, again, I'm not quite sure who's making the decision. It seems a little too
Let me reiterate.
utopian about how we all wind up agreeing on the right technical things.
See,
and then what's my parameters of choice? So like you've come up with this great car, except then I say, okay, but I want a different car, and then you say, don't worry about it because all the printers are going to print all the kind of cars you want.
Well, let me ask you this one. How much choice do you think you really have? How much choice do any of you people think you really have in a world that's driven entirely by a corporate incentive, entirely upon mass production in a very inefficient way, producing things that, yeah, there's the illusion of difference. Everything is as 1984 as you could possibly imagine in the world today. Everything is carbon copy. Look at the average homes out there. There's very little variation. The entire infrastructure is certainly without variation. People have very little options to do tons and tons of things. I can't put solar panels on my home without an enormous amount of money. There's inhibitions across the board. So this idea, this sort of indulgence that we have that we can exist in a way we can't exist in a way, without the market system, because the market system enables this freedom of choice, is really a delusion. If we leave this materialistic culture, if we stop this obsession with consumption that has been imposed upon us, we could find balance to an extent where we drive our values and importance from how we relate to each other, how we help, how we contribute to the world, how we better ourselves in a deep personal way, not how many cars we have in the garage or anything else.